Is this the dagger?
G'day guys, JB here, another video underway, and it is the monthly update. My update on the MVP race for the 23-24 NBA season to the end of January. Now, obviously the last MVP update came tied in with an end of week video wrap. It's a matter of balancing the schedule there, coming out of Christmas and organising that around some personal commitments and also organising that around the work roster and work situation. Now that I have a far better balance on that, and now that I have a refocus, so to speak, when it pertains to work and other things there, I'm able to get this balance a little better and able to pump out these videos with a little more interest. Obviously the MVP race taking some genuine turns around some serious sharp corners right now. There's a lot of fluctuation with key players. There's a lot of adjustments on a game-by-game, day-by-day basis. And as you guys would know, it's something that I track daily. This isn't a, well, let me have a look and see who is playing well for a really good team. I have a running shot of every team and every game they win, and exactly how players are performing. So this doesn't necessarily have recency bias to it. If a player's jumped out early and maintained, or a player jumped out early and maintained, if a guy had a scattered start and has picked up and been able to hold it, well, he's there too. But this isn't a matter of who's played well in the last month. This is a genuine totality of the season for me. So without further ado, let's get into it. The MVP race for me to the end of January for the 23-24 NBA season. And as everyone knows, I do have qualifiers for the award. The big one being the major talking point right now surrounding the MVP and surrounding all of the awards. And that's playing at a 65 game pace. I used to have a 70 game pace until the NBA instituted this rule. To give you some idea, no player outside of Bill Walton had ever played at less than 85% of a season and won an MVP award in that respective year. It's now 65 games, so it does reduce that by a little bit. In fact, if you're looking at it from a totality standpoint, it's now 80% of games played. I still like the idea of 70, but if the NBA's got a rule in that they're going to vote on, hey, why not use that to your advantage? 65 games there. Key one, as everyone knows, being the best player and leading your team to wins. You can't just be a contributor, you just can't be a side piece. You need to be someone who genuinely has impact on the game. And for me, it's a matter of being the best player when your team is winning. How much of a factor are you in there? And that, to me, also provides a bit of balance as well when it looks at teams, particularly around the All-Star selection and particularly the All-NBA selection too. Yeah, you might be playing on a team that has won 65 games, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've been as good as a guy who has genuinely been leading a team that might not be doing so well and he's really shouldering the load. So 65 games, leading the teams to wins. Ideally no trade talk. I don't really see the value in an individual if there's constant talk about them not being around the team. And ultimately, you've got to be in playoff contention. You've got to be with playoff hopes. I still sit with the top 8. I know that there's the play-in tournament, but I don't know anyone except Steph Curry in the year that he averaged that 30-point season in 2021, where he absolutely had no one around him and was bundled out in that play-in tournament. Again, play-in tournament, that's another kettle of fish for discussion on another day. But you've got to be in contention. You've got to keep everyone thereabouts on the mark. And for me, that's really crucial in the way I assess players on that one. So it's ultimate. You need to be at a 65 game pace. At the time I compile the list, you do need to be leading your team to wins. You cannot be the source of trade talks, and ultimately your team needs to be in playoff contention. Most of those go hand in hand. I don't have a stat category. At the end of the day, the statistical side of things will take care of itself if you are performing and if you are getting things done. If you're not getting things done, if you are not performing, then your numbers aren't going to be great and the results for your team aren't going to be great either. So without further ado, let's get into the list for how I see it at the end of January. My honourable mention in this one, Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors. Steph is the best player for me in 17 wins this season. Warriors are 20 and 21 when he plays. 41 games played, 33.5 minutes per game. I think everyone knows the issues that Golden State have right now. They understand that it's not this guy. Ultimately, there, Steph has to have a 30-point night on 50, 50, 100 shooting right now for them to be a chance. Thankfully, Kuminga's stepped up in the back half of January here, but you're still dealing with Draymond Green. You're still dealing with Klay Thompson. You're still dealing with Andrew Wiggins. You know, a lot of pieces of the puzzle that just aren't fitting. I mean, my most recent video there on a wrap of the week, you know, why don't Golden State throw the carrot out and see what you're going to get for Steph Curry? And I don't mean that as they need to get rid of Steph Curry. You need to see what teams are willing to give up for him to understand his value. And if he does depart, look at what you've got left. And then you'll soon realise what the issue is. Steph, for me, for this Warriors franchise, he's the constant. He's the Tim Duncan of that team. He's the Bill Russell of that team. You know, these are the guys the team is built around. Here's who they play for. Here is the reason they will succeed. Curry on the season so far through January, 27.5 points, 4.3 rebounds, 5 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.4 blocks a game, 45.5 from the field, 40.9 from deep, 92.9 from the free throw line, 3 turnovers a game. 17 wins. I mean, you're going to get a real idea of just where I think Steph overall sits in the context of the season with how he's played. If you were going to be basing this off just the idea of producing wins and leading your team, Steph Curry's not outside of the 10. In fact, the only thing I'd say Steph Curry's outside of is the top 5. And he wouldn't be 7th. That's how good of a year I think Steph's had. I'd have had Steph very close to All-Star starter. I would have had him as a reserve. He was a reserve. So I have no issues with that. I don't think he's been one of the 2 best guards in the West this year. I think he's certainly been the 3rd best. But I don't think he's been one of the 2. But he's had a really good season. Still consistently being the man. Still showing the reason ultimately why Golden State remain around that 500 mark. Remain in contention and why he is considered one of the best players of his generation. We go from one little guy to another, and at number 10, cracking into my MVP vote, Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks. What else can you say about Jalen Brunson right now? He's the most popular athlete in New York. He is the man on this Knicks team. He is genuinely the leader of this Knicks team. And with everything that's going on in the East right now, with the huge run that he's had so far in this calendar year, with the run the Knicks have had in this calendar year, he is having a huge impact on New York. There aren't any trade talks around him. He's on pace to play 65 games. He's coming up huge in wins, and they are definitely in playoff contention. Ticks all the boxes. He's producing. Massive effort there, Jalen Brunson. He's played 46 games, 35.7 minutes a game, 30 and 16. That's the record of the Knicks in games that Jalen Brunson plays. And he's been the best player for me in 14 of those 30 wins. So not quite 50% of the way, but that's a lot of responsibility. You are definitely the number 1 man on a team if you are close to 50% of the wins being your fault. And I mean that in the most flattering term. You've got to really look at the fact that you're talking about Brunson 6'2", 6'3". Dallas shouldn't have picked him up. He's not really a helpful sidekick to Luka. Geez, the Knicks are really weighing in. And since day dot, he's been the man. And he's continued to produce. And again, I said this in my last video, there's no doubt about it for me, Becky Hammond is correct. Little guys don't lead teams to championships. As I said, 3 people realistically have that claim. Steph Curry, Isaiah Thomas, and if you want to go back to 1957 and you want to factor in the Rookie of the Year factor for the Rookie Year factor for Bill Russell, Tom Heinsohn was Rookie of the Year 56-57. Bob Cousy. That's it. That's the list. So Brunson's trying to do a lot of work here. Do I think the media market in New York's probably helping his case a little bit? Sure. That's not impacting my decision. 14 wins, best player for New York. They're in playoff contention, doing a lot of things right, delivering down the stretch, hitting big shots, putting up points, showing leadership. There's a level of intangible as well to Jalen Brunson right now, and I'm really liking that. So far in the season, to the end of January, Brunson's averaging 26.8 points, 3.8 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 0.9 steals and 0.2 blocks, 2.3 turnovers a game, so he's really low in that sense there. 48% for a little guy from the field is good. Leading all of my MVP candidates in 3-point percentage at 42.2%, 83.6 from the stripe. As I said, best player in 14 wins, number 10 in the MVP race to the end of January, Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks. Over to number 9, and this one might shock a few people, but this guy's getting his first All-Star break. He's had a huge season. He's taken that next step. Thought he was having a bit of a sophomore slump, but he's certainly come out of that. He stepped up as the man in Orlando. They're above 500. They're only a sophomore level team. They've still got a couple of seasons to go. Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic. He's played in 48 games. Again, from more perspective, no one in this list of 10 has played more games than Banchero. He's averaging just under 35 minutes a game, as you can see. 25 and 23 in games that he has played, and he's been the best player in 15 wins for them. He's been the leader of Orlando, and he's started to take that step. And over the last couple of weeks, he started to try and lift that efficiency, which has been crucial in those results previously for Orlando. Okay, there's a scout on him now. Okay, they're trying to force him to do things because he's clearly going to start trying to put things into his game that he's practicing, that he's learning, that he's trying to implement into his skill set. And that's obviously going to cause some issue. You can see the 3.1 turnovers so far. Low points production relative to that there. But he's really taken a step, and I think it's a really scary thought that you've got a guy in his sophomore season who is legitimately making a case as one of the 10 best players in the NBA. That's frightening. How doesn't happen very often. How many guys second year in the NBA did you look at and go, he's a top 10 player in the NBA? Think about it over history where you legitimately could look at a guy in their second season and go, he's definitely one of the 10 best players in the NBA. That's how I feel about Banchero right now. He's grabbed that Orlando team by the reins. It's probably shaken them a little bit, but once their offensive efficiency picks up, their defense speaks for itself. They are still a playoff level team, and he is clearly the man on that team right now. 23 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 steal, 0.6 blocks a game, 3.1 turnovers. It's only his second year, ladies and gentlemen. He's going to get better. The team is going to get better. Paolo Banchero being number 9 on my list here in January of 2024, may be one of the lowest points he reaches in my list for a decade. Barring accident, barring injury, this is the level of play that we can expect to see from him consistently. As I said, number 9 in my MVP race to the end of January 2024, Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic. And when you really want to look at guys that have also taken a step, you move over to this guy here. Donovan Mitchell of the Cleveland Cavaliers, number 8 on my list to the end of January. Through 36 games, this is where there's a little bit of a crux. Through 36 games, he's averaged 35.6 minutes, 23 and 13 record in games he's played. He's been the best player in 15 of those 23 wins. I myself suggested that maybe Cleveland weren't going to be doing so well without Evan Mobley and Darius Garland. Multiple media outlets suggested that Cleveland were going to be no good and that the Donovan Mitchell experiment should be over after 18 months. A failed playoff run last year, yes, still the best season that the team had seen without LeBron James since 1998. And guess what? They're going to do it again this year. A huge run from Donovan Mitchell since the injury points to Evan Mobley and Darius Garland in December. Donovan Mitchell has put in work. They have won 14 of 15 of their last few games. 14 out of their last 15 games, I believe it's been. Currently on a win streak of a handful. Beating key opponents. And Mitchell has been the crux of it. Now, Max Strus is being a nice support. Yep. Happy to agree with that there. Jarrett Allen, nice support. Happy to agree with that there. But not one person who wrote this team off, not one person who decided that Donovan Mitchell was done and needed to move on and that, hey, we're going to end up getting him over at the Knicks and we're going to move Randall on and everyone else. No one has gone back and said a word because Donovan Mitchell has just shut them up. You know, there was the big argument of, well, he should have been Rookie of the Year over Ben Simmons. And if you want to use hindsight as your 2020 pick, then yeah, go ahead, look at the career they've had. You would probably take Donovan Mitchell in that sense. People blamed him for the Utah years, despite the fact that he was having scoring runs in the playoffs as good as anyone in franchise history. And that includes Karl Malone. That includes Jeff Hornacek. That includes Adrian Dantley. You know, ticking a lot of boxes there. Then he goes to Cleveland, and everyone wonders, geez, did Cleveland make the right decision? Has a wonderful year last year, gets them to the postseason. Yep, wasn't good enough. Simple as that. I think they would admit they weren't good enough. But he's bounced back huge this year, under duress, under pressure, and really answered the critics. Mitchell on the year, 28.2 points, 5.5 rebounds, 6.4 assists, 1.9 steals, half a block, less than 3 turnovers a game, 46.5 from the field, 34.8 from deep, and 86% from the free throw line. A massive year for Donovan Mitchell. Of course, the big question does remain, though, will he play enough games? He is allowed to miss a total of 17. A total of 17. That's not many. And for a guy who has missed quite a number of games, that is the only question that I have hanging over him right now. And I certainly think that a few others would be in a similar situation. We do need to just clarify that one there for everyone to understand exactly where Donovan Mitchell sits in the hierarchy of games. Because I am very confident that he has already missed 9 games. And see, this is where the rules do come into effect, and I understand that it's not ideal, but it's the rules. That's the situation we're in. So Donovan Mitchell to the end of January, for confirmation there, had missed 9 games. So he can miss another 8. He's allowed 8 games in the back end of the year, which is fair enough. That's, still substantial time, but that's fair enough. But that might be the big crux there for Mitchell being in contention, not only for All-NBA selection, but any other awards that may be going his way. A massive season so far, Donovan Mitchell. Number 8 in my MVP race to the end of January 2024. Over to number 7, and, it does become a fair bit of, well, I do have to favour seeding to an extent when I am trying to organise players. And that's probably the big decision that I came to here when I'm really trying to cipher through my 15-win players. Ultimately, for Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics, my number 7 in the list to the end of January, he has been the leader of the best team in basketball. That weighs in for something. And I don't know anyone that would disagree with the fact that if you are the best player on the best team in the league, there is a level of credibility that needs to be there. Now, to what substantial level you are the best player on that best team is the next question. And I think that's why we've seen some really different results in the way of MVP races in previous years, because people have weighed up the fact that, well, geez, yeah, Jokic was only, 2-3 games off the pace of other teams that were considered first and second seeds. And he won as many games, so it's really hard for people sometimes to justify that, but I think that's where we are at the moment. And I think Jason Tatum this year is a perfect example. He played 45 games, averaged 35.8 minutes. The team is 35-10 in those games, and he's been the best player in 15 wins. And he's played on probably the most rounded team in basketball. You're talking about Porzingis and Derek White, who are not all-stars, who played to an all-star level, but they play on a very good team. Jaylen Brown, who was in my December update there, he's certainly dropped off a little bit over January. Tatum still persisting there. He certainly raised his game after a bit of a slump. The leader of the best team in basketball. And he's played really, really well. So obviously there's going to be votes that do come his way just by being the best player and a win on a team that's winning a lot of games. But you've still got to be the best player on the team in that game on that day. And for me, he's done it 15 times, and he's done it more than anyone else on the team. He's still, under 3 turnovers a game. I think his efficiency's probably dropped a little bit this year. But when you look at why it's dropped, it's because there's other options now. He's not having the ball in his hand as much, so he's probably not as warm as previous. But you can genuinely make a case he's still the best small forward in basketball. A genuine case that he's still the best small forward in the NBA. I would have Jason Tatum on my team before, at the moment, all but 7 players. All but 8 players, realistically. When you're in that top 10 conversation, we're talking about the best of the best. We're talking about genuine superstar players who are genuine levels above everyone else, who are going to put your team in contention. Just how it works. But as I said, Tatum's efficiency's probably dropped down from last year. I think he's become a better basketball player this year. He's on a much more rounded team, but I think him sharing those possessions, giving them up to other players, being able to step up when he needs to, that works out really well. The only gripe that we really have on Jason Tatum at this point is he needs to do it in the postseason. When he starts doing it in the postseason, it's a completely different ballgame. We all understand that. So the real question is what is Tatum's long game here at this point? He's had his All-NBA, he's had his MVP conversation, he's had his All-Star conversation, he's had his Kobe Bryant conversation. Now he needs to have his championship conversation. He needs to be the next leader of a Boston Celtics championship team. And I dare say, in the annals of history, being up there with Bill Russell and Larry Bird and Paul Pierce, compared to some individuals, I would have that on my resume. Certainly ahead of when you look at some of the MVP discussions and conversations that have been had and the success rate of MVPs or their lack of in the postseason. I think I'll take leading Boston to a record-setting 18th championship in that category for sure. Tatum, 26.9 points, 8.4 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 1 steal, 0.6 blocks on 2.6 turnovers, 47.3 from the field, 36.6 from deep, and 81.3 from the free throw line. Number 7 in my MVP race for 23-24 to the end of January, Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics, as we look to just outside the top 5. And we look at a guy who has taken massive steps over the last 2 seasons in his game. He's continuing to prosper this year with, again, a team that is continuing to grow, continuing to develop, and really trying to stake their claim out in the West as the best team there, and certainly a genuine Western Conference championship contender. Anthony Edwards of the Minnesota Timberwolves, 45 games played, averaging 34.9 minutes, 32 and 13 in those games, and he's been the best player in 16 wins for my liking. Anthony Edwards clearly took a step last season. People didn't want to speak about it because there was the fear that there was going to be a rule, and the rule that has been implemented, and that was the 65-game rule. So last year there were probably a couple of All-NBA selections, a couple of All-Star selections, and considerations around the league that really didn't factor in durability and didn't factor in performance that wasn't yet perceived. And I think Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton were the clear 2 examples of that. And Anthony Edwards and Halliburton are the clear 2 examples that have jumped up beyond expectation. Edwards is still very much a project, but this is a guy in his 4th year. This is a guy who right now is past that assessment stage. When we look at Anthony Edwards' career, we need to consider the fact that, 4 years in, he's still making the point of, I'm the best player out of my draft class. To give you some comparative numbers for Anthony Edwards compared to last season, Edwards 24.6 points last year, this year 25.5. 5.8 rebounds last year, 5.2 this year. 4.4 assists, 5.2 assists this year. 1.6 steals last year to 1.2 this year. 0.7 blocks to 0.5 blocks this year. Turnover rate very similar, 3.3 to 3.4. From an efficiency standpoint, he has got better, 45.9 to 46.4 from the field. 36.9 from deep to 38.9 this year. And free throw shooting improved from 75.6 to 84.2. So efficiency-wise, he has developed. Production-wise, ultimately stayed the same, but he's not having as many possessions as he did last year. But because it's evident that Minnesota are a better team, and therefore they're now worth watching, people are going to start paying attention. Newsflash, Anthony Edwards to me was a top 10 player in the NBA last year. I don't think it's a shock for me that Anthony Edwards is a top 10 player in the league this year. I think the shock comes from the fact that with Karl Anthony Towns clearly having an impact, and Rudy Gobert is allowed to play his own position, and Naz Reid is making a huge impact off the bench for them, and Mike Conley is having an impact for them. There's all these factors, these evident factors with this team that are making them a good basketball team. But you can only be as good as your best player. And that probably does speak a lot of volumes right now as to how good Anthony Edwards has been. I think a few people have started to sit up and take notice. They took a lot of notice during the World Cup period. They're going to take a lot more notice during the Olympics coming up. And there's even been a few shocks there that Anthony Edwards has, showed a lot of that explosive athleticism that really was tailor-made for him when he entered the league. And all of a sudden he's back displaying that again because he's developed his floor game. We're talking about a really nicely rounded shooting guard. You make a case, one of the three best shooting guards in the league. For me, one of the two this season. Unfortunately, he sits at number 2. And to give you an idea, he would need to almost double the amount of the leadership side of things as far as leading his team to wins. Would need to double that to get close to the guy that I have at number 1. But still, a huge year for Anthony Edwards once again, continuing to make a point. And it's not even going to be a rule factor that keeps him within or thereabouts in the MVP conversation. A massive season so far for him. As I said, 25.5 points, 5.2 rebounds, 5.2 assists, 1.2 steals and 0.5 blocks a game, 3.4 turnovers, shooting 46.4 from the field, 38.9 from deep and 84.2%, number 6 in my MVP race for the 23-24 NBA season to the end of January, Anthony Edwards at the Minnesota Timberwolves. As we enter into the top 5, and this one is just a genuine overawing statistical dominance that is certainly leading to results. At number 5, one of the 5 best players in the world right now, Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks. He's played 40 games. He's averaging 37.5 minutes per game, which is the leading minutes per game amongst all of my MVP candidates here. Dallas are 23-17 in games he's played, and he's been the best player in 18 of those 23 wins. Paired up with Kyrie Irving, they've had a really, really solid season. But the problem is, Dallas just aren't that team. I mean, if Dallas were genuinely winning games, and I mean piling the wins on, from a statistical standpoint, it's nearly impossible to argue Luka Doncic isn't the best player in the NBA. But stats don't tell the whole story, because stats don't give you results. And don't get me wrong, they're impressive stats. If I told you a guy was averaging a rounded 35, 9, and 10, you would assume that this guy's probably the best player to ever play the game of basketball and that he must be leading his team to championships. Now, there is obviously going to be some critical analysis when I bring that factor up. And I understand it and I get it. But when you are the reason that a team is succeeding, and when it's clear that the team is building around you, it does get to a point where you just simply need to produce. Now, I'll give Luka this. It looks like he's probably going to now win a scoring title, because a man that I'm going to mention in this list very shortly will not be eligible. And we're going to be talking about a guy who's going to be, from a perimeter standpoint, he's going to be having as efficient perimeter scoring season that's been seen, not named Michael Jordan. That's just a fact. But Dallas are, what, a 7th seed? The, 7th, 8th seed in the West? 3-4 games above 500? It's the same argument that needs to be made with Luka every single season. Yes, he's dominant. Yes, he puts up great numbers. This is a guy who's had a 70-piece. He's now tied for the 4th highest scoring game in NBA history. The most efficient 70-point night in the history of the NBA. But his team's only 4 games above 500. As I said, full credit to Luka for putting up the numbers. But you need to get results. And realistically right now, we're talking about he's going to be playing in the first round as an 8th seed. Or worse, he's now going to be battling in the play-in tournament and could potentially not see the postseason. Very, very tough. And it's what hurt a major cause for him last year when we were discussing the MVP conversation, when I was discussing my All-NBA conversation. Here's a guy that's not going to make the playoffs. There's a level of value, and not making the playoffs is not value. Not being up there in the seeding is not value. but he is contributing to wins, and they're still in the top 8. 34.7 points, 8.6 rebounds, 9.6 assists. That's one of the most ridiculous lines I've ever read. 1.4 steals, 0.6 blocks, 3.9 turnovers, but he's got high usage. 48.9 from the field, 37.5 from deep, 78% from the free throw line. Number 5 in my MVP race to the end of January for 2024, Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks. Going over to number 4, and a guy who is likely to start making a run a bit further up this list, but that will always depend on team function and team success. Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. He's played 46 games. He's always durable. Giannis, 35.2 minutes, 31-15 record in games played. The best player in 22 of those 31 wins. Touching back quickly for Luka, he is obviously leading them in minutes. He's also the high assist man of my MVP list at a whopping 9.6 a game. But Giannis, he's just Giannis. He's still one of the 5 best players in the league. He's still one of the most rounded players in the league as far as getting it done on both ends of the floor. But it now gets to a point where you've had multiple seasons as the number 1 seed where you didn't win. You've won it once. You've been bounced a couple of times badly. You've now got Damian Lillard, one of the biggest bucket getters when it matters for the last decade. And now you've had another coach move on within 6 months. This is put up or shut up time for Giannis. Because don't get me wrong, I think on an overall basis, and I mean overall in you're considering all ends of the floor, and you're looking at a guy who's producing, you're looking at a guy who can get it done, there is still a case that Giannis Antetokounmpo is still the best player in the NBA. Still a case. But it now gets to a point where Giannis is not going to go and doesn't need to do much more from a regular season legacy standpoint. The guy's going in the Hall of Fame. Had a 50-piece to close out an NBA Finals. A 50-piece to close out an NBA Finals. You can argue the best closeout series game ever. Genuine conversation that can be had. But that was 3 years ago now. There's only so many fumes you can run off. And when you've tried to absolutely refuel the gas tank here, with some genuine premium 95, 98, you need to burn that energy up. You need to burn that engine up. Foot to the floor, go through the gears. Because Milwaukee are in a slight little bit of a slump in an Eastern Conference that's starting to tighten up, albeit outside of Boston. And they are going to need to be in form. And they are going to need to be a team that has every advantage in the postseason. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of value in what Giannis is doing. When they're winning games, he's clearly their best player. How many games are they going to win, though? How many wins are going to matter? How healthy are they going to be? I think it's just to the point now where Giannis really needs to continue to push the tempo, really lift the tempo. I don't mind if he's going to go backwards if the team's going to be winning games and other guys are going to be, having good nights out. But it is still at a point where if Giannis doesn't perform, this team will not win. And that includes with Damian Lillard on it. It's at a point now where he does need to perform. The legacy's there in the regular season. No doubt about it. The ability to perform in the postseason's there, but so is the question of sometimes not being able to perform in the postseason. And I love Giannis. I think Giannis is one of the 25 greatest players in the history of the NBA. But living on the fumes of a championship 3 years ago is not something that he will rest on. Nor should the Bucks rest on. They've now signed him for 3 years. They've managed to get Damian Lillard. They've turned the coach over again. The end of February will not be as interesting as the end of March, but it could be a telltale sign. Very interesting to see. Giannis at number 4 on my MVP list. to the end of January for the 2023-24 season, averaging 30.9 points, 11.6 rebounds, 6.1 assists, 1.4 steals and 1.1 blocks a game on 3.6 turnovers, leading all MVP candidates for me in field goal percentage at 60.8%, 25.3 from deep, and 66.1 from the free throw line. As we move over to a genuinely sad story, and the last time that this man will appear in any of my MVP lists, certainly countable for the season. At number 3, Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers. 34 to the end of January, 34 games played at 34 minutes a game, 26-8 record, the best player in 25 of those 26 wins. Dominant might be the best way to describe it. From all reports, could be up to 2 months out with a meniscus tear. That will do it. Now, yes, it's unfortunate, but it's the rules. And from an underlying standpoint, it's always been the rules, but it's just more evident now that it's in writing. Massive season for Embiid, on pace to have the best scoring season by a centre since Kareem. 50 years. And a torn meniscus has all but dashed those hopes. And this is the man that was going to win the scoring title, and the man who was probably going to win a second MVP in the eyes of the media, having a career best year. And now there's a real chance that Philadelphia start to tumble a little bit. There's a genuine chance if Philadelphia aren't in contention when he's ready to go, don't be surprised if they just put him on ice for the rest of the season. That would be a pure management decision and standpoint, and it wouldn't be one that I certainly would disregard. Embiid to the end of January, 35.3 points. Yes, that's correct. 35.3 points, league leading and MVP leading. 11.3 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 1.1 steals, and MVP leading, 1.8 blocks on turnovers there, totaling 3.7. But it's the efficiency of scoring that basketball, 53.3 from the field, 36.6 from deep, but 88.3 from the free throw line. Pouring in the points, playing good defense, dominating the opposition. As I said, 26-8, I had him as the best player in 25 of those 26 wins, and converting at the free throw line, so you can't even run the risk late of trying to just force him to the line, because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And yeah, it's unfortunate with the injuries, and I agree, it's not ideal. But how many seasons have we seen where a player's injuries have cost them? How many seasons have we seen guys not play enough games? And yeah, it's not fun, but it's a fact. Guys like Anthony Davis and Kawhi Leonard this year aren't really getting the hype they deserve because of the previous injury toll that they've had. Embiid, unfortunately, another one that's going to be injured. This will be the last time you see him appear. It won't even be possible to put him in an honourable mention. Now, do I agree that maybe the penalising, depending on games played, for all NBA selections is tough? Yeah, 100% it is. Because you might have the best centre in basketball play 65 games and the next two play 63 and 61. Okay, so if you need to determine your All-NBA second and third team on that, I get it. It's just going to be really tough to consider right now that if you were putting the three best centres in the NBA to play 65 games this year, Bam Adebayo's had a nice season, and he's probably been the fourth best centre in the NBA. But does that necessarily mean that Sabonis has been good enough to be considered second team, let alone Adebayo All-NBA? Again, it's the top 15 players in the NBA, the way they do it now, I understand it. But, yeah, real shame there for Joel Embiid, who still, at the end of January, is third in my MVP race for the 23-24 NBA season. Silver, number 2, a guy who jumps up, and this is, again, this comes down to availability ultimately. And I think he's had a really stellar year. I think this has been another good year, but I think Jokic is just so elite right now that it's very hard to quantify. Number 2, Nikola Jokic from the Denver Nuggets. 47 games played, 33.7 minutes, 32 and 15. I think he's been the best player in 25 of those 32. Just an offensive masterpiece once again. Getting it done from the field, getting it done from the line, getting it done from a possession standpoint, leading his team to wins. Still with the only real team you can trust out of the West as the best player. Coming off a finals MVP, a huge Western Conference run. I mean, the best Serbian to ever play the game. Just ridiculous. And he's having another good year. And there's really, it sounds horrible to say, but there's not much else to really add to it. He's just so much of a unique player. I mean, from a rounded standpoint, 26, 12 and 9 on 59% from the field. Like, it's ridiculous the dominance that he has with a team that is tailor-made with guys that probably aren't going to peak out where they thought they would. Second and third options that are genuinely, one of them could be a genuine number one, the other is perfectly suited as his third option. Bench guys who play their role, veterans who love being around him and understand how the game's played. Everyone wants to say it's a system. Well, that's okay, because he is the system. And it's just utilising that play style that has been massive for Jokic. It's hard for me to say much more. He's just dominating in wins. They're winning games, and he's producing. It really is the basic crux of the value of an MVP. How valuable are you? He's playing at a 65-game pace. He's available. He's ready. They're winning games. And he's the best player when they're winning games. You don't hear really any trade talks about anyone in Denver, let alone Jokic. And they're a playoff contender. In fact, from an experience and durability standpoint, they're probably the contender still in the West. He ticks all the boxes. I can't go into too much depth beyond the fact that he's a freak. Point centre. He's a point centre. Jokic at number 2 in my MVP race. 26.3 points, 12.1 rebounds. He is leading all MVP candidates for my liking in that category there. 9 assists, 1.2 steals, 0.9 blocks and 2.9 turnovers. If you want to really make the case, if Luka Doncic was to just be the most efficient player he could be, he would be as good as Nikola Jokic. And it's probably the ultimate difference. 58.5 from the field, 35.8 from deep, 81.5 from the free throw line. He's sitting at number 2, and unless the guy that I'm about to talk about has a freak injury, he's going to remain at number 2. He may very well now, looking at the NBA.com MVP ladder, he may very well win a third MVP. I'm not against if he wins a third MVP. He should have won one last year. What I'd be against about is the fact that the guy I have at number 1 has been so far and away ahead in my mind of everyone else this year. It's not funny. At number 1, Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. 47 games played, 34.4 minutes a game. Team at 33 and 14 for a win-loss record. And to me, the first player to crack 30 wins this season, 31 of the 33 in his name. Shai's got an awfully talented team. A young upstart team, heaps of depth, heaps of potential. Oh, and we've got every draft pick, so the best kid from 5th grade onwards right now will be assigned to our team. A ludicrous amount of draft picks available. With tremendous depth and most of the core 25 and under. And Shai is the reason it works. And I understand that you've got Chet Holmgren having a huge season. I get it. He's the second best rookie in the NBA this year. Josh Giddey's had a lot of turmoil going through and a lot going on. There's no doubt about that. But he's still now back out there producing. You want to continue through to look at some of the other players that they've got there. Jalen Williams has had a sensational year as a second option. Lou Dort continuing to have good contributions. Carson Wallace having a good year. When you look at all of these options on this team, there is one thing you need to consider. None of it would be possible without the impact of this man on screen. Shea does it at both ends. He does it efficiently. He does it consistently. And he does it so quietly that you forget he exists in the league. And let me just wind this back a little bit more. When we're going to talk about players who have taken the step and no one notices, or until you see an All-NBA team, or until you see an All-Star game, or until you watch ESPN and it gets spoken about, no one cares what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing right now. And I think it's the number one example for me right now of people who say they watch the game and are savants of the game and cover the game really don't have a clue. They really shouldn't, in my opinion, be having these votes or have any idea. And, you know, toot to my own horn, but if someone working a full-time job who does this as a hobby, a genuine hobby, can sit there and keep track of every game played in the NBA and be able to do a reasonably well educated opinion like this, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets a little bit of consideration because someone jumps out of a queue, or he occasionally gets mentioned once a month on mainstream television, I just don't know what everyone's watching. The one time I've seen some genuine talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander this season was when they asked, would you take Luka or Shai? And they backed Shai in. Great. Awesome. That was it. We're talking about a guy who, to the end of January, 47 games played, as I mentioned, 34.4 minutes, 33 and 14 for Oklahoma City, best player in 31 wins, the number one team in the Western Conference. Shai's averaging 31.3 points, 5.6 rebounds, 6.4 assists, 2.2 steals. Of all the NBA MVP candidates in this video, he leads them in steals, 0.8 blocks, 2.2 turnovers, the most efficient player in that sense, ball in hand, 54.5 from the field. That's ridiculous for a shooting guard. 34.8 from deep. I would like to see that a little better if he's going to put them off. But let's look at the other side of it. He's shooting 89.2% from the free throw line. That's a ridiculous free throw conversion rate. That's the best of anyone in contention in this list. So he plays both sides. He averages 30. He makes more than he misses. He's an elite level defender. He doesn't turn the ball over, and he leads his team to wins. He plays in games. He produces. It's ridiculous that people are still arguing the point about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. There are people that don't think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is better than De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox isn't even the best player on his own team. It's just unfathomably crazy that people are not understanding what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing this year. Now, it's not something that needs to be done all the time, but let's have a look during the recording of just where his season stacks up historically. And of course, how do we measure what it stacks up historically with? Well, there's only really one name at the shooting guard position that you're even going to consider, right? Only one. Now, let's consider seasons where this particular individual, we'll call him Michael J, or MJ for short, in seasons where he averaged 30 points. Let's look at seasons where he averaged 5 rebounds. Let's look at seasons where he averaged 6 assists. And on top of that, let's have a look where he averaged 2 steals. So Jordan, 32, 8 and 8. The first year that Michael Jordan averaged at least 30 points, 5 rebounds and 6 assists with 2 steals was 1988-89, where he averaged 32.5, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, 2.9 steals. He then did it again in 89-90, where he averaged 33.6, 6.9 and 6.3 with 2.8 steals. You then have to go to his second championship season of 91-92. 30.1 points, 6.4 rebounds, 6.1 assists, and 2.3 steals. They're the 3 times it's been done, right? On 50% shooting. That's it. Now, let's have some more perspective on it. Let's go to Kobe Bryant. 3 times Jordan did it. Let's go to Kobe. Kobe peaked out at 6 assists exactly and never did it in a 30-point game season. Let's look at Dwayne Wade. Heard he played okay at the shooting guard position. They're really the 3 contemporaries you can compare this guy to. Again, a rounded 30, and this is being generous, at 35 and 6, not 36 and 6. Dwayne Wade is the only other guy with 30 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals in a season. But he didn't shoot 50% from the field. So we're talking historically about the 4th time a player has the ability to have 30 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals with 50% shooting. Just the 4th time ever. Everyone talks about the second coming of Mike, and geez, what would Mike look like in today's game? And geez, we haven't seen people do this. You're right, we haven't. And I'll agree that the era makes things easier for Shai. But I'll also point this out. If Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was putting these numbers up while he played for New York, while he played for Boston, while he played for Los Angeles, while he played for Philadelphia, or while he played for Chicago, it's really simple. SGA would equal MVP. And that is why he is my MVP through January. And looking at the pace that he's running at right now, I don't see anyone catching him. I don't see anyone catching him at all. That's been me, guys. That is my MVP wrap through January for the 23-24 NBA season. So recapping once again, an honourable mention to Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors. At number 10, Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks. Number 9, Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic. At number 8, Donovan Mitchell of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Number 7, Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics. Number 6, Anthony Edwards of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Number 5, Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks. Number 4, Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. At number 3, Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers. Number 2, Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets. And my MVP at number 1 so far for the 23-24 NBA season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's been me, guys. I'm out.